Today we have the brand new and used vehicle market update. With obviously inventory still continually rising, the lots are packing fuller. Unfortunately, the average transaction price continues to climb still. Incentives have slowly continued to drop in recent months. Sadly, that leaves buyers in a predicament to buy or not to buy. We're seeing repossessions climb as well. We're seeing more and more people underwater with negative equity on their cars that they purchased back in 2022 and 23 when they paid market adjustment fees and just strictly overpaid for many of their new cars. Welcome back, my savory seeds of sunshine, and today we're going to break this down, what the new market looks like and what the used car market is suggesting here up to date in the month of May of 2024. According to Cox Automotive, the number of days supply of vehicles on the market, brand new vehicles, were traditionally 70, 72 days, and now we're up to 76 days average as we're starting to see inventory climb. Every manufacturer, with the exception of the likes of Toyota, Lexus, and even somewhat Honda, everybody else is increasing their inventory, trying to push out the latest and the greatest, but buyers aren't responding. Instead of buyers picking up the latest and greatest high-dollar vehicles like full-size trucks, full-size SUVs, now they're looking for lower-cost alternatives, some subcompact cars, subcompact SUVs, and sport crossovers that are much smaller, diminutive, as well as lower cost. And while there's a few outliers, for example, like Porsche, which actually dropped number of days supply down to 64, almost 10 points, the likes of products from Stellantis like Jeep, Ram, Alfa Romeo, and even Jaguar, which is another independent, are finding inventories exceeding more than double the industry average, clearly not selling the products that they have today. And while we've seen this steady increase in the amount of inventory, that's the number of unsold vehicles on car lots collectively across the industry, we've seen this gradual increase. This last month we've seen increases, but we've seen even more than that. We've seen increases over the last couple of years. And now we're finally at an all-time high of 2.84 million unsold units across the board. With the average day supply being around 76, sadly, we're still seeing price increases. The average listing price has crept up to $47,433, absolutely unheard of in a market where it's softening up. Buyers are starting to be a little more reluctant to purchase. The confidence isn't there, and people are deciding to sit on their money rather than throwing at a car. We're seeing sales decline, but if you're one of those folks that absolutely needs to buy a new vehicle, this could be a decent time to buy. Not the most amazing time, and while some analysts are saying this is an amazing time, that's simply not true. While we are seeing increased inventories, we're also seeing availability, your choice of colors, and we're seeing some incentives. For example, we're seeing Ram knocking off prices, $7,500, $12,500. I've even seen $18,500 off of the sale price of a vehicle in the Ram stablemate. The fact remains is they've gone up as much as 50% on their base MSRP prices. That doesn't even come close to matching what we've seen in inflation rates. So clearly we've seen a lot of greedy dealers and a lot of greedy OEMs trying to take advantage of a scarcity of chips, a scarcity of inventory, and unfortunately now there's going to be a scarcity of buyers. So some of these OEMs should be sharpening their pencils. And my adage is continue to wait. Now, unfortunately, what we're seeing in the US market is a lack of adjustment to the interest charges. Now, we're seeing lending rates still stabilized, and we were hoping to see some big changes on that front, but the fact remains is inflation maintains a certain level. People are still buying food, housing, cars. People are still spending the way they typically have. And unemployment rates continue to slightly drop in the United States. In Canada, interest rates continue to hover as well. Although there's talk about possible adjustments here coming up, the fact remains is we're holding a steady level of inflation, and therefore interest rates don't seem to be getting adjusted anytime soon. And now that's putting additional pressure on some of these manufacturers to come with creative ways and more incentives to sell to the customers. Customers don't want to buy, with an 8-9% interest rate. They're waiting for these analysts to suggest, hey, we're going to see big drops in interest charges, but that's simply not happening. So now OEMs are starting to come up with more creative ways. The unfortunate part is a lot of people just don't have the money. And even with adjustments to the interest charges, knocking down to 8.9, we're seeing some of these manufacturers offering up 1.9, 2.9%. I've even seen many OEMs with 0%, and a lot of the 0% interest charges are on vehicles that simply aren't selling. Obviously, we're seeing a lot of electric vehicles in that 0% Kia, 0%, Mazda in the low percentages as well. What we're not seeing great percentage rate offerings on vehicles like Porsche. We're not seeing them great interest rates on manufacturers like Jaguar, Range Rover, and a lot of the top-end luxury vehicle brands. For just those brands, for example, anything over $50,000 are also starting to see a hit, and they're selling less and less vehicles as the day supply increases for those particular brands, while people are deciding to go with a more cheaper alternative. Mazda, for example, represents some of the best buys out there. If I could suggest a lower cost, more cost economical, more reliable, and a brand that's likely going to actually interact with you. There's many opportunities out there to get great deals. Subaru, Mazda are all likely to sit down there and carve out a deal for you. Well, there's other brands that just simply won't budge. I've had customers, a lot of you folks out there have reached out and said, I've gone into the GM dealer and they won't move. I've gone into the Ram dealer and they won't move. Now, I'm seeing different fluctuations in that space because we know Ram's putting some hard targets for sales, but they're not selling. We know that. We see unfortunately, their inventory supply is growing at an alarming rate. Now coming out with newer product lines, they're promising 25 new models in the Stellantis brands, but they're just not selling. And they can't even sell 22s, 23s yet. They're highly incentivized and they're still not selling. 25s are starting to hit the lots and people are barely buying those as well. So days supply over a Jeep has increased in this last month. Jeep's days supply have actually increased by 21%, clearly an indication and trigger that buyers don't want the product or it's simply priced too high. And we know that. They're trying to sell themselves as an upscale brand when we know the fundamental core buyers of a Jeep or a Ram or a lot of those products are more the midstream, blue collar, mainstream buyers. The people that are working 9 to 5, carrying their metal lunchbox to work. Those are the people typically buying those brands, but yet specific brands from Ram, Chrysler, Jeep, Stellantis to an upscale market. Those aren't the buyers. They're missed the target and they're missed the mark. And it shows 21% increase on the inventory of Jeeps, as well as Ram's gone up 14%. Clearly they've missed the mark there too. Even with some huge incentives, they're still outgrowing and outpacing the number of buyers available willing to spend on the sales of a new Ram. Now, a couple of other OEMs that have finally climbed over that 100+ days supply, Mini. Clearly, they've gone up actually 56% month over month in terms of inventory. They're not selling. They're now located at 108 days supply. So if you've been thinking about buying yourself a BMW Mini, this may be your time. But a lot of people are looking more frugal options. That's why they're looking at more the Mazdas, the Toyotas, the Hondas, vehicles that have known reputation for reliability. And while Mini is a smaller subcompact car, it comes from a luxury segment, which we know is a rough segment to be in right now. People aren't hunting for those types of vehicles. They don't want that nice to have luxury. They want more need to have reliability. And so that's the trade-off. That's the switch. That's the flip. And that's why even vehicles like Minis aren't selling so well. Mitsubishi is a bit of an odd duck though. They've also increased the day supply to 115 days supply, which is still about 26% month over month increase. Represent also another great opportunity to get into possibly a plug-in hybrid electric vehicle. If you don't want to go full in with the Toyota because of their lack of supply, their lack of negotiation willingness, and as well, of course, just the fact that their sheer price in the Toyota camp seems to be climbing, even though they're not charging over sticker and they're not getting excited there. I personally have that experience where I witnessed a brand new plug-in electric hybrid vehicle, the RAV4 Prime, and they were willing to tack on $11,000 for paint protection film and a little undercoating just because they had a low number of supply and they had one vehicle on the lot. They were willing to charge that. They were telling me about it. They were openly admitting about it and brazen. But the fact remains is they're charging a premium and they're certainly not giving their cars away. So that's where vehicles like Mitsubishi might represent a great good option. Not the most unreliable products on the marketplace. Certainly a lot of inventory out there. It might be an opportunity if you've been looking in that space, plug-in hybrid or a lower cost alternative. Mitsubishi might have you covered. So May posted a total inventory of 2.84 million units. Yes, and that's actually literally up 961,000 units higher or 51% more than the year before at this same time. And in our previous video, we reported 2.77 million units in April. Clearly, we're starting to see this climb. So for those actually willing to buy, having the money and the resources, this could be an opportunity. And honestly, and like I've said before, don't go in there necessarily expecting to borrow the entire amount. I would certainly go in there with a higher deposit, higher down payment, reduce your payments, even with some of these incentives, a lot of people still paying 4.9, 8.9, 12.9% on interest charges here. So the more you have down, the more you're going to save, because it's going to save you on some interest charges. So even with some of these incentives coming down the chute, like for example 0%, and I've advertised some of those, I've shown you some of the manufacturers that are offering up 0% or 1.9%, know that if they're taking away from the interest charges, they're going to add it on to the base MSRP. Because if you take the in-house financing and it's at 1.9% and you think that's a great deal, they're not going to give you the same cash deal as they would if you walked in there throwing cash down. If you walked in there full cash for that $30,000 car, there's a good chance you're going to pay more for the base price of that vehicle than you would as a negotiation for if you're taking their in-house financing. So clearly, caution. Don't throw caution to the wind when you're buying these cars, but definitely the more you can put down, the better off you'll be. Also, if you are looking at one of those trickster moves and you have the full amount, here's a little trick I like to play sometimes. Negotiate the cheapest deal possible based on their in-house financing. Get the car as the hardest deal, but make sure that deal is open-ended and the finance allows you to pay it off with zero penalty, because a lot of these will have a penalty to absorb if you pay the vehicle off in advance. But if it has zero penalty, and you're able to do that, get in on that deal, pay the vehicle down after a month or two, make a payment or two, and then pay it off, and you basically paid zero interest. So that's where you can get your greatest deal if you actually have the cash. And as well, Kelley Blue Book estimates that the seasonally adjusted annual rate of sales in April was about 15.5 million. And all trends showing that 2024 is shaping up to be one of the best sales years since 2019, before this whole mess began. So it's a clear indication we're not going to see any big hard adjustments to the inflationary rates or to the interest rates, because inflation continues to hold strong. People are still buying. Sales are still up. But with that said, the increased cost of transaction prices just continues to climb. So that is also adding to the inflationary rate. And sadly, what that does is it continually pushes this whole level up, therefore isolating the buyers that don't necessarily have the funds to buy a new car. And so where does that leave that buyer that doesn't have that $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 or 90 grand for a new truck? Where does it leave that buyer that only has that traditionally that $15,000 or $20,000 to spend on a vehicle? Well, they're pretty much left high and dry, and now they're having a look at the used car market, which is another catastrophe. And we're seeing statistics that $6,000 is the average amount of people that are in a negative equity position when they bought cars back in 22. Clearly, people got in over their head. They paid way too much for vehicles that were a perceived shortage, or market adjustment fees were added on, or all the extras were thrown in, and the truck was fully equipped with roof racks, spare tires, mud guards, and the whole onslaught of paint protection films and everything else from Gap Insurance and everything, and they sold that to customers, and people were eating it up. Now, unfortunately, selling that car 3 years later leaves people in a predicament where that stuff is all fluff and it's not worth anything. So now these vehicles are totally dialed right in to a standard depreciation curve, and they're now unfortunately trying to unload in a negative equity position, thus leaving a lot of people owing extra money, more and beyond what that car's actually worth. So they could be 2 years in and ready to move on, and they find the bank saying, you owe us this, but the vehicle's only worth this. Now you're snookered. You have to either spend out a bunch of extra cash to buy yourself out of it, or continue just wearing that loss year over year. So 2024 shapes up to be a mediocre year is what I would say. Certainly the best year that we've seen for a couple of 2 or 3 years for sure, since before this massive spike of interest rates. This is probably the best time that we've seen yet. With growing inventory, we're seeing more selection, and now we're seeing dealers that are willing to negotiate. We've already said Ram, even in all of their infinite greed, has cranked up prices 40, 50, 60% in the last couple of years. Now they're starting to notch some of that back. So we're not back to where we should be. We're not back to a proper calibrated inflationary rate, but we are in a place where they're willing to negotiate. Now, if you walk down some of those car lots, you'll find a lot of standard MSRP price tags. But I've gone on my phone here and I've found a lot of great deals. I found a base Ram, long box, regular cab, rubber floors, and crank windows for 38 grand, down from 50 grand. So 2 years ago, you were paying 50. Today, you could probably get that for 35 if you go in there and wheel and deal. So clearly, there's a significant discount. We're seeing 10 or 12 or 15% off coming up for some of these vehicles. Now, does that take us where we should zero out? No, not quite. but the dealers are more open for negotiation today than they have been for some time. And that goes for many manufacturers. I will say brands like Porsche rarely are going to deal. They'll say, here's the price. So what? Pay it. Pay it or else. Same with Toyota. They're not going to give you any big negotiations. They're basically going to say, here's your sticker. And while you might not necessarily overpay, you're not getting any great deals, but I would suggest you still try to negotiate. It's always worth trying to negotiate. I will say on the other side, never, ever, ever pay for a market adjustment fee. And I don't care how popular a vehicle it is. It's hot today, tomorrow it's not. Think even Corvette C8 Z06. Nobody wants that. They're selling, I'm seeing the prices start to tank on those. We're seeing electric vehicles really tank. And while I've seen a few people that are still in a place of, denial, where they're trying to sell their used Teslas for a premium dollar, the fact remains is they're not selling. So they can ask whatever they want. But at the end of the day, the overall market trends show electric vehicles are tanking a serious tank. And that's, if you're ever thinking about buying an electric vehicle, and obviously it's a caveat because more people than not are basically trying to shy away from that. We know the industry isn't as exciting as it was 2 years ago when it felt like it was the up and coming. We're seeing the unsustainability. We're seeing the cost of batteries. We're seeing now vandalisms at charging stations or unavailability of charging stations. We're just seeing a lot of negatory around it. And while there's a lot of positive, short commutes in the city, reduced emissions, it's easy to drive, it's buzz around, it's lower cost from your day-to-day commute. The fact remains is rural communities can't use them very well, and planning long trips is very cost prohibitive or very prohibitive in general. So you almost always need a second ICE vehicle if you're going to own an electric vehicle. Now, with that said, there's great deals to be had there. If you're actually looking, this may be your time. This year, we're seeing lots of the banks of Canada, Reserve, US are not necessarily dropping their rates, at least not substantially. We're going to start to see OEMs start to chisel down rates. APRs we're going to start to see dropping. So watch out for that. Watch out for big discounts on the core fundamental, the MSRPs. Look at, if you ever wanted a Ram, this could be a good time to start looking. Now with 25 showing up, 23s, 24s, they're going to be strong incentives. Jeeps. Yeah, Jeeps are a little overpriced, and I think it's going to take a lot to push them, knock them down a little bit. But there are some great deals. Mazda, again, I've said some Kias, some of these other manufacturers, I've seen some great deals. If you want to look at the Mustang Mach-E, if you ever felt like you wanted an electric truck, the Lightning might be a great deal to get on a used car market. So the used market is a bit of a mess. It's a conglomeration of hard to find vehicles, which clearly a nice used low mileage unmolested vehicle like a Corolla, for example, it's going to be a hard vehicle to get a hold of. A nice low mileage, unflooded, unaccident history vehicle like a Camry is going to be a hard vehicle to find. Now, it's easy to find lots of vehicles that are on there with banged up rims, paint, some paint damage. Maybe it's hit a curb and it's only got $7,000, history on it. Maybe it's a theft recovery. Maybe any of those conditions. Most of the used vehicles I'm finding now have some sort of a black stain on them. So what you're finding is the quality are down. There's lots of repossession. So a lot of these repos are hitting the market now. So those quality vehicles are going to be lower. So that's a word to the wise. If you're buying a used vehicle, do your background checks, your PPI, pre-purchase inspection. Make sure you definitely check your Carfax for accident history, theft damage. And there is this thing, title washing, when they transfer from state to state. There's a lot of thievery out there. So word to the wise, buying a used is always a little bit of an additional risk over buying new, not just from the used and worn out and mechanical perspective, but now you got to worry about thievery, you've got to worry about title washing, you got to worry about other issues with factors, like I said, that, even maybe just the quality of them coming through auctions. A lot of those vehicles aren't the best vehicles available. And the worst part is the prices are holding steady, and we're seeing them up around that 25,000 plus for the transaction price of a used vehicle. They're really not moving all that much. There's some small fluctuations, but for the most part, used vehicles are simply holding stable. If you can get yourself a $10,000 used vehicle that's lightly used, not abused too hard, maybe under 60 or 70 or 80,000 miles, for example, a nice little slightly used, maybe an 8 or 10-year-old Honda Civic would be your sweet spot. But those are going to be very, very hard to come by. And they're going to be worth a premium. And that's what everybody's looking for, is that $5,000 to $12,000 used car. But they're hard to find. And so we're finding these average prices continue to hold up. The average transaction prices are holding high, both new and used, simply because less and less of those subcompact vehicles available. There's a lower inventory rate. Day supply is low on those smaller subcompact vehicles. Day supply is higher on the bigger SUVs and trucks. And those are what the manufacturers are selling. Why do you think Ford's not pushing as many Mavericks? They could man up, they could definitely scale up and produce far more Mavericks, but they'd much rather load up a car lot with F-150s, F-250s, because those have huge margins in them. The little Mavericks don't have the huge margins, so they're selling them, but they're not pushing them out like they're trying to push the bigger products with bigger margins. So the overall average transaction prices continue to climb, both new prices, and then that trickles down to used, because that F-150 that's 3 years old, that buddy's going to trade that in, that's now hitting the market. And as it does, that's still a premium vehicle, high cost vehicle that's going to continue drive up the used inventory prices too. So we're in a place of, a little bit of equilibrium right now. Unfortunately, it's a high equilibrium. It's a place where people are overpaying, trying to pay a premium dollar for a used vehicle that is in less than great condition. And the new vehicles are holding high. Inventory of quality, lower price vehicles from the Toyota, Honda, Lexus, even Mazdas are a little harder to find. So that's where I'd suggest looking in definitely the Mazda and Subaru fronts. They have a little more days supply. They might be more willing to negotiate, and that's probably your best buy. And with all of these increased prices, customers are crying for help. And ownership of vehicles now is out of reach of many, many people. Unfortunately, you want to see that video. Hope to see each and every one of you on the next one. We'll see you real soon. Bye-bye.